Today, I want to talk about not myself, just about how I came to the understanding of the truth that is opposite, that is 180 degrees different than mainstream Christianity. How how did this happen to me? It started from actually the beginning of my life. Raised as a little Amish boy, and my mom and dad left the Amish when I was a year old, but my dad carried with him a couple of things. One of which was the German Bible, the Lutheran German Bible, which he said he simply just couldn't understand because the language of the Amish is different than German. And the other thing he carried with him was the one thing that caused me to see the truth. It was another book. It was a brown book about 3 inches thick with text so small that I would not even be able to read it with my reading glasses I have on right now today. I don't know how many pages, I don't know how many thousands of pages it has in it. It's called The Martyr's Mirror. Now, The Martyr's Mirror is a book about how how do I put this? The true stories of individual Anabaptists who were murdered at the hands of the Catholics and the Lutherans. And I tell you, I don't know if it is even possible to read the whole book and keep your sanity. I have read some of it, and that book convinced me that mainstream Christianity follows the devil. And to this day, still does. Because the followers of Yehoshua would never, ever do the things that the ancestors of mainstream Christianity has done. Ever. And so, with that ammunition, I began, along with my dad, to challenge conventional wisdom and conventional religion. While other religions were preaching replacement theology, my dad first and then myself talked about salvation for Israel, written in the Moses and the prophets, and written in the words of Yehoshua, the Messiah, and the disciples. And one thing that we had learned when we started talking about it to everyone that we found is that when you started talking about salvation for Israel, their eyes would just glaze over. They didn't believe. You see, they'd been taught that the only way that you can be saved is to believe on a man by the name of Jesus. Well, first of all, the Messiah's name is not Jesus. The Messiah's name is not even Jesus. His name is Yehoshua. It means Jehovah, the Father saves or is salvation. Nobody in mainstream Christianity knows that or believes that. So their own, how do I put this? Their own narrative disqualifies them. Meanwhile, back to my ancestral history, the Anabaptists, who were Sabbath keeping followers of Yehoshua, who kept the commandments, while mainstream Christianity, the Catholics and the Lutherans, etc., rejected the commandments. Now, what I want to do, I will go to, what is it? It's called, what does that say? It says gameo.org, but I thought it was, okay, Global Anabaptist Mennonite Encyclopedia. Okay, here we go. Now, I hope I didn't lose my place. Okay. So way down, more than halfway into this particular article, it says Luther favors the execution of Anabaptists with the sword. From this point of view, Luther's famous official opinion of 1531, not 1541, in cooperation with the Wittenberg's theologians must be understood. And this is in, I don't know what book it's in. It says Corp reference 4737 FF. I have no idea what that means. I suppose it's a book. It repeats his views in a more or less classical form and must not be weakened. His addition to the decision of his colleagues is explained by the fact that John of Saxony, or Johannan of Saxony, had requested an opinion of the theological faculty as a whole and of Luther in particular. The opinion was formulated by Melanchthon, but Luther added the words, "I approve," and expressly sanctioned the execution of heretics. Although it is very terrible to view, he did this for 4 reasons. I want everybody to listen carefully. Number 1, they, the heretics, aka the Anabaptists, condemn the office of preaching the word. Number 2, they have no definite doctrine. Number 3, they suppress true doctrine. Now, the first 3 are slander. But the 4th one, Martin Luther was correct on. And I want you to listen to this very, very carefully because you have heard something like this before. Number 4, they want to destroy the kingdom of this world. What? They want to destroy the kingdom of this world. Well, now that's interesting. I wouldn't, now the way he put it sounded violent, but it is true they had nothing to do with the kingdom of this world, you see. And they wanted nothing to do with the kingdom of this world, but they themselves could not destroy the kingdom of this world until, of course, Israel's true Messiah came. So even the fourth one is only partly true. Okay. So one out of the three of these points of Martin Luther was slander. But the fourth one was partly true. They would have nothing to do with the kingdom of this world. Right? Why was Martin Luther defending the kingdom of this world? He knew that the kingdom of this world was in Rome. This is what he was alluding to. So even as a Protestant, he condemned the Anabaptists to death for rejecting the man at the Vatican in Rome. Right? So let's go and find some scripture here. We could go over many scriptures. So we'll start in John 15, verse 9. If you were of the world would love his own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. So it appears, now I'm not making a definitive statement here, but I'm just saying that when Martin Luther, when he made the statement that the Anabaptists, they want to destroy the kingdom of this world, okay, as his reason for demanding the execution of Anabaptists. When you read the scripture, when you read the words of Yehoshua, you see, I got to go find it again, in John 16 and verse 19, it says, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. So the real reason why Martin Luther hated the Anabaptists was because they were in fact chosen out of this world. Okay. Okay, so let's go to, let me make sure that I haven't missed anything. Please bear with me for a minute. I'll go to verse 20. Okay. All right. So I will go and look at another particular passage. It would be 1 John 2 and verse 15. We all know this. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. You should know this. And Martin Luther accused the Anabaptists of hating the kingdom of this world. That would put, in those days, I'm not saying right now, that would put the Anabaptists in those days on the side of the Messiah by default. Okay? So let us go to another scripture. James 2 verse 5, listen, my beloved brethren, did not Jehovah choose the poor of this world? to be called, to be rich in faith and heirs in the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him. Okay? All right. 1 John 3, verse 1. See you what love the Father has given to us, that the children of Jehovah we may be called. Because of this, the world does not know us, because it did not know him. 1 John 3:13. Do not be surprised, brethren, if the world hates you. Or marvel not, my brethren, if the world hates you. All right. Now, I'm going to go to verse 17. This is very, very interesting. But those who has this world's goods and sees his brother have need and shuts up his bowels of compassion for him, how does the love of Jehovah dwell in him? So the question then being, if the Anabaptists were the poor and John merely said that that those who have the world's goods and sees his brother have need and shuts up his bowels of compassion, well, Martin Luther did far worse than that. He did far worse than that. All right. I think the last one I'm going to go to is this. I don't mean the last one on this video, but the last one in this particular portion of topic here. Second Corinthians 4 and verse 4. Now, before I read 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 4, let's go back to the words of Martin Luther again. Number 4, they want to destroy the kingdom of this world. Okay? This is what he said concerning the Anabaptists. Now let's see what Paul had to say about that. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 4. In whom the God of this world, or king of this world, has blinded the minds of them who believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of the Messiah, who is in the image of Jehovah, should shine upon them. Okay. Who are these people he was talking about? Are you ready? We'll start in verse 1 of 2 Corinthians 4. Therefore, seeing that we, that's Paul and Barnabas, have this ministry, as we have received mercy, or because we received mercy from the Almighty, from the Messiah, from the Almighty, the Father, we faint not, but have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty. We noticed that much of Martin Luther's statements was completely dishonest, did we not? Okay. Not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of Jehovah deceitfully, like Martin Luther did, but by manifestation of the truth. As I mentioned in some of my earlier videos, that I myself endeavor to first search for and find the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Anything else is unacceptable. Okay, by the manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of Jehovah. But if our gospel is hidden, it is hidden to them who are lost, in whom the God of this world, Satan, the king of this world, Satan, has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of the Messiah, who is in the image of Jehovah, should shine upon them. For we preach not ourselves, but Messiah Yehoshua, not Christ Jesus. You see, this is a part of the mishandling of the word of Jehovah that the murderers have perpetrated on the Bible. It was them who did this. And because of it, they are lost. For Jehovah, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shined it in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of Jehovah in the face of Yehoshua Messiah. So you see, when Martin Luther made his false accusations against the Anabaptists to justify their murder and execution, as they would say back then, justify their murder, he slandered them, just like the devil slandered the Jews. And he said they want to destroy the kingdom of this world, as if he is somehow a defender of the God of this world. You see, this is why I keep trying to point out that the God that mainstream Christianity serves is actually the devil. And this is proof. Protestants, you need to pay attention. It isn't just the Catholics who worship the devil, it's you too. All 4 points, even the condemnation of the office of preaching and their false doctrine, were included in the category of sedition, blasphemy, and were therefore on the basis of the second commandment to be punished by the government. Remember? The Messiah said he was not of this world. And then he said that when he left this world, that the evil one would come down. It's in John 14, I believe it is. If I will go there, I will go there and show it to you. Just a reminder to those who have been watching these videos, or as if you have heard this for the first time, John 14. We'll start in verse 27 because 27 through 31 are full of information that your preacher has rejected. Peace I leave unto you, my peace I give unto you. Not like the world gives peace. Not like Martin Luther gave peace. Or not even like Adolf Hitler gave. Yes, I put the two together because Adolf Hitler preached the same lies as Martin Luther. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. You have heard how I said unto you, I go away and come unto you. If you love me, you would rejoice because I said, I go to the Father, For my Father is greater than I. Well, Christianity does not believe that. They do not believe that the Father is greater than the Son. They reject that entirely with their false Trinitarian doctrine. Oh, they would accuse me of being a heretic just for saying that, and they would hang me or set me on fire. That's what they would have done just for saying that. And now I have told you before it came to pass that when it has come to pass that you might believe. Now, hereafter, I will not talk with you much, because the prince of this world comes and has nothing in me. You see, Martin Luther was defending the world and its prince. When he ordered the executions of the Anabaptists, Luther often replied to objections to this view, raised in part by himself and part by others. He did so especially in the exposition of Psalm 82, where he replied to the charge by Lazarus Spengler of Nuremberg that he, Luther, contradicted himself. He held to the principle that no one should be compelled to believe, but if one is punished for teaching contrary to the creed, he is not punished as a simple heretic, but as a public blasphemer, subject to secular penalties. Personally, one may believe that he will, in inner matters of faith, no judge pass a sentence, but teaching and blaspheming are prohibited unless the teacher goes where there are no Christians. The papists who confessed the Apostles' Creed were logically not included among the blasphemers. The congregation of nonconformists cannot be compelled to believe is to be punished by the government for the reason that corner preaching, kind of like what I'm doing right now. I'm off in a corner in rural North Carolina. Corner preaching. I almost lost my place. Okay, so it says that the congregation of nonconformists who cannot be compelled to believe is to be punished by the government for the reason that corner preaching foments disturbance and sedition. Here too, it was not heretical belief that was punished. Luther also forbade Protestant clergymen to preach to the congregation of a papist or a heretic, seeing sedition is the very act of preaching without an official call. But why were the Jews who blaspheme, as he said, against Christos not punished as blasphemers? Luther replied they were already punished in their staying outside Christendom, and furthermore are not admitted to public life. Furthermore, they would be punished if they blasphemed openly or by corner preaching in Christian homes. But on these principles, it would not be possible for the tyrants who persecuted the gospel to punish the evangelicals in whom they see blasphemers. Answer: what difference does that make? The king of Israel killed some true prophets also. Nevertheless, the command to stone the false prophets remained in force. So you get the idea here, and rightly so, that the Anabaptists were treated just like the Jews were being treated. Luther's sermon on Matthew 13:24, the sermon called The Tares Among the Wheat, of February 7th, 1546, thus shortly before his death, maintained his position and is not to be construed as moderation due to old age. One should remember that by this time the threat which Luther saw in Anabaptism and Schwarmertum no longer existed. No more sedition and no more blasphemy was in evidence. Why? Because he nearly killed them all and drove them away. The tares, it is true, still includes heretics, conspiracies, and sects, but these were within the church and were not to be considered as disturbers of public order or as blasphemers. Hence, the several penalty was to be only the ban of the church, not governmental punishment, no human power and might. Here, the heretic is only a heretic. Yeah. Once they got rid of the people he hated. Let me see if I can find one of the other ones. Luther successfully, this is on wikipedia.org, in the anti-Jewish agitation. Luther successfully campaigned against the Jews in Saxony, Brandenburg, and Silesia. In August 1536, Luther's prince, elector of Saxony, John Frederick, issued a mandate that prohibited the Jews from inhabiting, engaging in business, or in passing through his realm. An Alsatian Stadion, Rabbi Hosel of Rosheim, asked a reformer Wolfgang Capito to approach Luther in order to obtain an audience from the prince, but Luther refused every intercession. In response to Hosel, Luther referred to his unsuccessful attempts to convert the Jews. I would willingly do my best for your people, but I would not contribute to your Jewish obstinance by my own kind actions. You must find another intermediary with my good lord. Heiko Obermann notes this event as significant in Luther's attitude toward the Jews. Even today, this refusal is often judged to be the decisive turning point in Luther's career from friendliness to hostility toward the Jews. Hosel of Rosheim, who tried to help the Jews of Saxony, wrote in his memoir that their situation was due to that priest whose name was Martin Luther. May his body and soul be bound up in hell. Not my words. Those were the words of Hosel of Rosheim. He said, may Martin Luther's body and soul be bound up in hell. That's what he said. Who wrote and issued many heretical books in which he had said whosoever would help the Jews was doomed to perdition. Robert Michael, professor emeritus of European history at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, writes that Hosel asked the city of Strasbourg to forbid the sale of Luther's anti-Jewish works. They refused initially, but relented when a Lutheran pastor at Hochfelden argued in a sermon that his parishioners should murder the Jews. Luther's main works on the Jews were his 65,000-word treatise, Von den Juden, and Erhenlügen. I'm sorry, my German isn't so good, to those who are listening. In English, On the Jews and Their Lies. And von Shem Amphoris and vom Geschlecht Christi, of the unknowable name and the generations of Christ, reprinted 5 times within his lifetime, both written in 1543, 3 years after his death. It is believed that Luther was influenced by Anton Margaretha's book, Der ganz Jüdische Glaube, the whole Jewish belief. Margaretha, a convert to Christianity who had become a Lutheran, published his anti-Semitic book in 1530, which was read by Luther in 1539. In 1539, Luther got his hands on the book and immediately fell in love with it. The materials provided in this book confirmed for Luther that the Jews in their blindness wanted nothing to do with faith and justification through faith. Margaretha's book was decisively discredited by Josel of Rosheim in a public debate in 1530 before Charles V and his court, resulting in Margaretha's expulsion from the empire. So, Charles V and his empire. So, when Martin Luther accused the Anabaptists of, what was it, wanting to destroy the kingdom of this world, he was talking about the kingdom of Charles V. Who was Charles V? The Holy Roman Emperor. The King of Italy. Well, well, well. You see, in 1543, Luther published one on the Jews and their lives, in which he says the Jews are a base, whoring people. That is, no people of God, and their boast of lineage, circumcision, and law must be accounted as filth. They're full of the devil's feces. That's Martin Luther. You Christians, you evangelicals, and you Protestants, the man that you follow, claimed that the Jews are full of the devil's feces, when he himself admitted that he attacked the Anabaptists, that he justified their executions for being against the kingdom of this world, aka the kingdom of the devil. Yes, Martin Luther's detractor, Josel Rosheim, was correct. The man was inconsistent, incoherent, and contradicted himself. He said they are full of devil's feces, which they wallow in like swine. The synagogue was a defiled bride, yes, an incorrigible whore and an evil slut. He argues that their synagogues and schools to be set on fire, their prayer books destroyed, rabbis forbidden to teach, homes razed, and property and money confiscated. They should be shown no mercy or kindness. And then, as I was growing up, I read the words of James, what he said about mercy and kindness. Let's go there, shall we? And I hope I don't lose my place. I don't think I will. Did I delete that? Oh, I'll just go make another page here. How about Matthew 12 and verse 7? But if you would have known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Okay? Matthew 18, verse 33. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you? Let's see, it um, should be in the book of James. James 2 and verse 13. There will be no mercy for those who have shown no mercy to others. So Martin Luther will be shown no mercy because he demanded no mercy upon the Jews. So he will be shown no mercy. He will receive the full brunt of condemnation, damnation. And his followers should know this as they are following him down the path to death, to utter destruction, to perdition. Okay? Now, Romans 1:31. Without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. Well, that described Martin Luther. So essentially, Paul is warning the Romans against things that would happen later on, as who knowing the judgment of Jehovah, that they themselves who commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure. These Martin Luther and his hatefulness against the Jews, against the Anabaptists, are right up there with all the other people. In verse 18 through 23 and 24, he is in the same path as they. So as I said before, I knew while I was reading the Martyr's Mirror that these people, these persecutors, were Satan's children, and that the ones who did not do the persecuting were not Satan's children. I learned this a long time ago. But it took me a long time to grasp the full understanding of how the new covenant is, in fact, the salvation of Israel. But if you ask any Christian today what the new covenant is, they won't know. They will not know. They will have no idea. Why? Because they're in darkness. Because the God of this world has blinded them to the truth, as Paul said. Paul reaffirmed the words of Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, about what the new covenant is and who it's for. If you care to read it. And he reaffirmed it in Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12. How dare Paul? Yes, if Paul would be living in the days of Martin Luther would have killed him too. Because Martin Luther killed the people who believed the words of Paul. Murdered them. I hope you're ready for this, evangelicals, Protestants, and Lutherans. I wonder if I should read from author Henry Westerink, or maybe I should just read from. I will just go ahead and read from here what I just mentioned, but you can find it on Wikipedia too. It's not hard to find. Church reformer Luther inspired Hitler. The fierce anti-Semitism of the 16th century reformer Martin Luther helped create the climate in which the Nazis killed 6 million Jews. Rene Suess wrote in his recent study, Luther's Theologist Testament, or Luther's Theological Testament. Luther's hate for Jews was not a small mistake, but rather a part of his essence of his reactionary religious ideology. Today, many still see him as one of the greatest German and Christian heroes of all time. If they do, then they might as well have followed Hitler. Because this satanic man, Martin Luther, groomed Hitler. Luther became famous for his struggle against the Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation. His anger was especially caused by the trade in indulgence in which the rich could get rid of their sins and buy themselves a place in heaven where nobody's going. He spoke out against the celebration of saints. The Jews are the saints. The cults around relics and celibacy and the papal hierarchy. He got his place in the dominant Christian history books as a fighter for emancipation and individual autonomy against Catholic corruption and the exploitation of the poor, because he translated the Bible into German and laid the foundations of German nationalism. He is still praised as a symbol of German unity. I will go straight into the lampoon part, I think. What in the world? Maybe I should read the law-abiding part. Research by Suess and other Luther critics shows how incorrect this positive image of the reformer really is. Luther copied important elements of extremely conservative Roman Catholic ideology and even amplified them. People who stood at the bottom of the societal ladder or who deviated from the dominant standards. Remember what it says, people who stood at the bottom of the societal ladder, the poor, or who deviated from the dominant standards could count on his excessive hate. Anabaptists. Together, his writing form one big rant against Jews, women, non-believers, farmers, the handicapped, and furthermore against everyone who didn't want to subject to the tyranny of the nobility and royalty. Subjects would never be allowed to resist the authority of the state because that power was given by God. Now, see, here's the thing. When Paul wrote about the authority being given by our Father in heaven, Paul's writings was before the Messiah ascended and Satan came down. Once Satan came down and occupied the seat in Rome as the king of this world, the context changed. Paul was speaking in those days before Satan came down and took over the kingdom in Rome, not after. I'll continue. So he says, it is better when tyrants commit 100 injustices against the people than when the people commit one single injustice against the tyrants. What kind of garbage and filth is that? According to Luther, as bad the administration may be, God is still prefer to tolerate its existence than to allow the rabble to mutiny. No matter how rightful it would be, a monarch should remain a monarch, even if he is a despot. Like, for instance, he would be in favor of Kim Jong-un to remain in charge of North Korea today. Or he would be in favor of Hitler remaining in power in Nazi Germany. His own words. Even if he is a despot, he will needfully decapitate only a few. Really? For he must have subjects to enable him to rule. In this manner, Luther traded one authoritarian religious doctrine, Roman Catholicism, in for another, Lutheranism. Because of its authoritarian ideas, his form of Protestantism became popular with the middle class and civil servants. Civil servants, they loved that. Lutheranism was especially, not the poor now, not the peasants. Lutheranism was especially popular in Germany. People in the Netherlands preferred the doctrines of other church reformer, John Calvin. In 1524, poor and pauperized farmers rose against a government which heartlessly exploited them. They were led by Luther's colleague, theologian Thomas Munzer. Luther unconditionally chose sides with the people in power. In his pamphlet against the murderers, thieving hordes of peasants, he called upon them to strike hard against the rebels. Therefore, whosoever can should smite, strangle, and stab, secretly or publicly, and should remember that there is nothing more poisonous, pernicious, and devilish than a rebellious man, just as one may slay a mad dog. Witches and the handicapped should also be persecuted and killed. He would order the killing of my own son. That's right. And you Christians expect me to recognize the authority of the father of Protestantism? No, absolutely not. I shall never. Witches and handicapped should also be persecuted and killed, he said, because they supposedly were devilish. So he appointed the handicapped who could not help themselves with witches. Martin Luther was insane. Martin Luther, a demonically depraved man, was insane. And in his eyes, women were nothing but breeding and littering machines whose sole purpose was getting children in the name of God and dying in the deathbed and the childbed if necessary. Now for the lampoon portion. Luther's most insane rants, however, were reserved for the Jews. We just saw how he treated the peasant Anabaptists and the handicapped. Now the Jews. Even in those days, when religious anti-Semitism was completely normal and Jews were treated as second-rate people, Luther's completely delirious and insane hatred of Jews was noticed by many. He is a master in the art of distortion, slander, defamation, and exaggeration. His contemporary Erasmus, who was also an anti-Semite, mentioned on his own on the Jews and their lies, one of the most horrible anti-Semitic lampoons of all times. Luther called the Jews, among other things, prophet murderers, bloodhounds, liars, a brood of serpents, children of the devil, seducers of the people, usurers, stranglers, and indolent bellies, the stinking scum, the moldy leaven. Jews were supposedly blinded and cursed, evil, vindictive, greedy, blasphemous, jealous, conceited, possessed, stubborn, and incorrigible. They would rule us, poison our wells, kidnap our children, pierce them through to catch their blood, and use it for matzo, a flat Jewish bread. They are our lands in misfortune. Luther used all conceivable anti-Semitic myths and stereotypes, except, of course, racial anti-Semitism, which was developed only in the 19th century. Luther was one of the first to say that one should get rid of the Jews by killing them all. With him starts the ideology of the final solution and of the Jewish question. The horrible objective of a world without Jews. For centuries, Christian rulers and ideologues had argued that the Jewish religion had become redundant and should end. With the birth of Christos, supposedly the Son of God, which Christ, Jesus Christos, is not the son of any God. Yehoshua, the Messiah, is the son of his father, Jehovah. The difference is 180 degrees. And the coming of the Messiah was fulfilled. And since the Jews had not accepted the Gentiles' false Messiah, I would read, and had supposedly even crucified him, they were rejected and doomed God. God had punished the Jews by sending them forever into exile. That's not what the prophet said. That's not what it says in the prophet. That's not even what Paul said. You see, Martin Luther was a liar and a slanderer. He would no longer consider the Jews his chosen people. They were replaced by the Christians. Now, everyone should read the entire book or the entire chapter of Romans 11. You will see that this is absolutely false. Absolutely 100% false. This Martin Luther was a serpent full of venom against the holy people, which Paul said that the gifts and the callings cannot be changed. In other words, once the Jews were called, chosen, and the elect, they would always be, not for the Jews' sakes, but for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's sake. Why? Because Jehovah made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And to break that promise would be defiling Jehovah's own name, and he's not going to do that. But this is what the Christians are demanding, that Jehovah, the Holy One of Israel, defile his own name. That's satanic. I will continue. Therefore, in any case, away with them, was the essence of Luther's propositions in the authorities of his day and age, because we are at fault for not slaying them. He urged the rulers to really start persecuting the Jews. Meanwhile, our princes and rulers sit there and snore with mouths hanging open and permit the Jews to take and steal and rob from their own money bags and treasures whatever they want. That is, they let the Jews, by means of their usury, You know why? You know why the Jews ran the banking system, ran the usury system? Because it was the only occupation that the Gentiles would ever let them have. That's why. And then here comes Martin Luther accusing them. By means of their usury, skin and fleece them and their subjects, and make them beggars with their own money. For the Jews who are exiles should really have nothing, and whatever they have must surely be our property. They do not work, they do not earn anything from us, nor do we give or present it to them. Yet they are in possession of our money and goods, and are in our masters, and are our masters in our own country and in their exile. The thief is condemned to hang for the theft of 10 florins, and if he robs anyone on the highway, he forfeits his head. But when a Jew steals and robs 10 tons of gold through his usury, he is more highly esteemed than God himself, Luther complains. Sometimes his social, economic, anti-Semitic rants seem to outpace even his traditional religious anti-Semitism. They let us work in the sweat of our brow to earn money and property while they sit behind the stove, idle away the time, and fart and roast pears. They stuff themselves, guzzle liquor, and live in luxury and ease from our hard-earned goods. With their accursed usury, they hold us and our property captive. Moreover, they mock and deride us because we work and let them play the role of lazy squires at our expense in our land from this self-made underdog position. Luther accused the people in power that they were letting themselves be ruled by Jews. In reality, the Jews were repressed, outlawed, and driven out of many countries in even Luther's age. Although one cannot declare Luther guilty of the Nazi crimes, he cannot be found innocent of his co-responsibility for the rise in criminal history of this anti-Semitism. One has to at least say that Luther was seriously lowered the threshold from ousting the liquidation of the Jews, Suss wrote. What Hitler did, Luther advised. With the exception of the gas chamber, Luther was a trailblazer to the Shoah. For those of you who don't know what the Shoah is, the Holocaust. Luther was the trailblazer to the Holocaust. That's the inevitable conclusion one has to draw from Luther's writings on the Jews and their lies. He had developed a 7-point pogrom plan, which the Nazis strictly followed, starting with the Kristallnacht of November the 9th, 1938. First, to set fire to their synagogues or schools, and to bury and cover with dirt whatever will not burn, so that no man will ever again see a stone or cinder of them, he wrote. He furthermore called to destroy the homes of the Jews and to take away their holy books, to kill rabbis who still want to teach, to disallow Jews on the streets, to forbid their usury, to take all their money and their jewelry, and to impose forced labor on strong and young Jews. And when the rulers didn't want to do all that, to at least drive them out of the country towards Jerusalem. He influenced German rulers to persecute the Jews even more. The Nazis didn't need to exaggerate the demonization of the Jews to be able to use it gratefully in 1923. Hitler praised Luther and called him the greatest German genius who saw the Jew as we today are seeing him today. In the days of the Kristallnacht, the Bishop of Thuringen wrote happily that Luther, who was born on November the 10th, 1483, couldn't wish a more beautiful birthday gift. During the Second World War, many religious leaders called upon Luther to justify the liquidation policy against the Jews. And during their Nuremberg trials after the war, Julius Streicher, chief editor of the anti-Semitic magazine Der Stürmer, defended himself by saying that even a genius like Luther hated the Jews, and he was loved by friend and foe alike. He would today have been in the dock of my place if on the Jews and their lies would have been brought in by prosecutors, Stryker claimed. Luther is still popular nowadays. Yes, he is. In 2003, the reformer landed on the second place during a TV show about the greatest German ever. And in the movie Luther, he was shown as the German hero who ended the Middle Ages. Even the Social Democrat and the Green Party in Germany have promoted Hitler as liberator and symbol of the German nation state. The Lutheran World Foundation does distance itself from anti-Semitism since the 80s. Since the 80s? They waited until the 80s to distance themselves from anti-Semitism? Please, folks. That's baloney. But refuse to acknowledge Luther's co-responsibility for the persecution of the Jews by the Nazis, which means they have not distanced themselves from Martin Luther's anti-Semitic views. Luther, according to Dutch Lutheran professor Bodenmaker, Luther didn't want a Kristallnacht in reaction to Suss's study, but a pogrom against the Jews was exactly what the church reformer proposed. The newly founded Protestant Kerk in Nederland, PKN, Protestant Church in the Netherlands, with its 2.3 million members, amongst which Lutherans will have to discuss Luther's anti-Semitism more thoroughly, as the LWF member of the PKN wants to also support the Lutheran tradition within Dutch Protestantism. The question is whether the organization will distance itself enough from the Lutheran tradition of anti-Semitism. The answer is no, they won't. Nope. Folks, you do realize where Protestantism started, don't you? Those of you who call yourselves Protestants, you know where that started, don't you? It started with Martin Luther. And I will tell you that one of the reasons why the vast majority of Christians are unable to see the truth is because their parents, or I should say their ancestors, were among those who killed and murdered the Jews and the Anabaptists in Europe. You don't see the horror of what your forefathers have done, because to do so, you would have to condemn your own forefathers, and most people are just simply not willing to do that. Well, my forefathers were murdered, burned at the stake, ripped open, drowned by not only the Catholics, but by the Protestants. Once again, as I said, my dad has a book called The Martyr's Mirror. about 3 inches thick or close to it, with text so small that I cannot even read it with my reading glasses. All the murders that were committed against the Anabaptists. We're not even talking about the Jews yet. And the persecution of the Jews is far greater than the persecution of the Anabaptists. And as I said, if one were to read the entire book, The Martyr's Mirror, the big one, not the tiny one that they're trying to sell out there, but the big one, one would probably become so depressed that they wouldn't want to live anymore. If you want to, that's your choice. If you want to hide yourself from the truth, that's your problem. I have read parts of it. I can't read the whole thing if I want to maintain my sanity. But I have read enough to confirm that I know of a fact that mainstream Christianity today follows the devil. I know this. And nobody can convince me otherwise. And the reason why I know this is because, as it is written, by their fruits you shall know them. Matthew 7, verse 16. Beware of false prophets, like Martin Luther, like the man at the Vatican, which comes to you in sheep's clothing, but are inwardly ravening wolves. What do ravening wolves do? They kill and they slaughter. You shall know them by their fruits. They kill and they slaughter. Do men gather thorns or figs of thistles? Thorns draw blood. So do thistles. So do ravening wolves. Even so, a good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. So let's stop for a second here, okay? Where it says up here on the top, condemn not that you be not condemned. Even the Amish today, when summoned to court to be a jurist, will, once the judge asks them, is there any religious conviction that will keep you from rendering a verdict? They will all, including, now I'm not an Amishman. I never joined the Amish, but I do the same thing. I was called for jury duty. I had to say the same thing that the Amish did. I had no choice. Condemn not that you be not condemned. Because if you render a guilty verdict, whatever judgment you judge, you shall be judged. So if I were to sit in the court of law as a jurist and render a guilty verdict on anyone, then the guilty verdict is going to be rendered upon me. So it was impossible in those days, or even now, that the Anabaptists would actually condemn somebody in the court of law. But once again, as too many religions do slip and slide towards false religion, from the Sabbath to Sunday, from the commandments to Lutheranism, the Mennonites and the Amish and the Hutterites, some of them have put themselves in danger. But to the rest of you Protestants, you are already on that path. Your forefathers murdered my forefathers. Therefore, you're no friend of mine. You have to acknowledge that mainstream Christianity is wrong, is opposed to the real Messiah, Yehoshua, is opposed to the Elohim of Israel, whose name is Jehovah, the name that most mainstream Christianity actually hates and would never use. And so, now you know how I came to believe what I believe. And yes, Martin Luther would have had a man like me, a corner preacher, killed. Martin Luther, the father of Protestantism, would have had a man like me, a corner preacher, killed. Unbelievable.